Let's say you're tracking guitars, right? And you need to have 4 heavy hitter amps at your disposal. Like you've got a Deliverance, a BE100, a rectifier, and a ecstasy, right? So you need to be able to switch whenever you want. How can you just do that? Problem solved. Let's say you're the kind of guy that just has a wall of Marshalls, heads and cabs, and you really want to figure out what is the best one today because they sound different every day, some reason. That's just how that stuff works. How can you really figure out which is the best combination? Problem solved. Let's say you have a 4 ohm vintage Fender head and you want to run it into that 16 ohm 412 cabinet because it sounds awesome that way, but it just makes you terribly uncomfortable to run a very expensive vintage amp with such a big impedance gap. Problem solved. This is the new ZMACS 4x4 impedance matching amp and cab selector from Fryette Amplification. I should say the wizards at Fryette Amplification. So what this does, let me just break it down super simple. Plug your guitar into here. Bunch of cables come out of the back. It's actually pretty simple. You can plug up to 4 different amps that will switch into 4 different cabinets. It doesn't matter what their impedance is, 4, 8, 16, because you just tell the ZMACS what it is and it matches them. There's a matching transformer in here. So like if you've got your 4 ohm Princeton, I've got, let's say I liked the Deliverance best running at 8 ohms, so that's set at 8 ohms, and I've got a Plexi running at 16 ohms, right? So, and a BE100. There you go. I got 4 amps. I have a 112 cab, a 412 cab. I could run out to my load box, direct box, and how about another 412 cab? You can never have enough 412 cabs. You've got all of these options, MIDI switchable. It's super simple. You just go, boop, MIDI 1. I want it to be amp 1, cab 2, store, right? You've already set up your impedances and stuff like that. Number 2, it'll be amp 3, cab 1, set your impedances the way you want them, store. And now you're just boop, 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 ready to go. But Michael, I hate MIDI. I'm so scared of it. I just don't, no problem. The wizards at Fryette have taken care of you, actually. You don't need to use MIDI with this at all. Of course, you could use the front panel, the faceplate, but they have a separate 2-button foot switch available, which just alternates modes. So you could have your standard, which is like, this is my head and this is the cab, and then you hit that and you get an alternate. You're like, cool, that one's gonna be this one and that one. So you could just flip-flop. It's really simple. So what are these buttons over here, you ask? Loop, X1, X2. Now this is where this gets super cool. There's an attenuation loop. If you are a Fryette power station lover like myself, you could throw your attenuator, in this case it's the power station, into one of the attenuation loops. There's 2 attenuation loops. What if you like 2 different attenuators and you're not sure which you like? They got you covered here. You put your attenuator, your power station in the loop, and now I can take 120 watt Fryette Deliverance and I could A/B it with my Fender Princeton. You can match them. You could go take it live and you could rock faces off with a Princeton right next and then switch it to your Deliverance. That is super cool. The X1 and 2 buttons are external switching for the power station, or you could, if you have a TRS cable that goes to an amp to switch its channels, you could use it to switch channels. The most sexy way is to use like a Power Station 100, which has an effects loop. So you could switch the effects loop and you could switch channels, which gives you 2 different volume settings for the power amp section of the Power Station 100. Let's go back to the beginning. I'm going to try to streamline this as much as possible. We have a guitar. We have 2 amps one cabinet, and the ZMACS. The guitar goes into the front of the ZMACS because you need to split that to any number of heads you're going to, right? So amplifier 1 is going to the Deliverance, amplifier 2 is the Princeton, and there's 4 2-guitar amp outputs on the back of the ZMACS, very clearly labeled. Now we need to get the sound back from the amps into that cab. So the amplifiers come back. Amp 1 is the Fryette out of its power section, and we're going to assign amp 1 to 16 ohms. That's what that's set to. Now the Princeton is assigned to 4 ohms because that is what that amp wants to do. You could switch it, and we'll take a look at that later. Very simple, just hit the amp button. I'm assigning that, and it'll just save it wherever it was left off, right? So 1 is Fryette, 2 is the old Fender. Now we're going to the cab. There's 4 cab outputs. I have cab output 1 going to this 412, easy peasy. Look, I'm assigning to 1, I'm assigning it to 16 ohms. There it is. If I have this other cab set up, I could easily just go to cab 2, run out there, and assign the details of that cab to the ZMACS. And this is where we're at. We're in the Deliverance. Now let's hear the Princeton. Back to the Fryette. Want to add another head to your option of amps? No problem. You just need one more guitar cable and one more speaker cable. This will go out of amplifier 3 to the Marshall head. This will come out of the Marshall head back to the ZMACS, and now my amp 3 will have the Marshall Super Lead as an option. Now I have the Super Lead in amplifier slot 3. Oh, it's so loud. It's at volume like 0.2. Here's the Princeton. And the Deliverance. I mean, I had to bring my mic preamp volume way down so that I didn't clip it with the Marshall. It causes problems. It's so insanely loud. How do you deal with that? Very easily. You have your Fryette power station, which is a fantastic sounding load box with a built-in tube power amp. So you could send anything you want out of this unbridled non-master volume 100 watt head, send it into the load box, then re-amplify it with your Fryette power amplifier. Now I have the Super Lead up to like 4 or 5, which you could hear it in the room. It's already wants to rage, and I can't even get my volume up. It's just ear-piercingly loud. I have the power station plugged into the attenuator loop. I'm gonna switch that in, and now we're running through the power station, and I could get all of that extra juice out of my non-master volume amp. Now, one of the added benefits of having the power station is I could get my Deliverance up. If you've ever turned even a master volume up to 3 or 4 in the 100 watt, 120 watt variety, it's crazy loud, but the amp starts to bloom. You don't have to get to 10. You just need to get up to that like 3 or 4. Then you run it to the power station and everything comes alive. So I'm gonna go to Deliverance amp 1. I'm gonna make sure that loop is on, which sends it to the power station attenuator. when you're running through the power station or another load box, you have to be aware of its own impedance setting. So that's just something to take note of. Now there's another benefit to running these together. I can run, let's say, the deliverance, which has a master volume, and if I'm running that live, there's no way the Princeton can keep up with that. But I could run the Princeton through the power station. Now it's a 100-watt Princeton doing what it does best, and this is doing what it does best, which is just give you any amount of volume you want, low or high, and then I could match the volume of the raging deliverance with the Princeton, easy peasy. I set the power station's amp impedance to 4 ohms because that's what the Princeton runs at. I've got the loop engaged. Now on the deliverance side, the loop is out, so it's not using the power station. It's running its own master volume. And yeah, let's start off with the Princeton, cranked up to like 7 now. Now the Power Station 100 has 2 channels and it has a remote switching foot switch. Just like if you had a 2-channel amp with a single 1/4-inch switch, you can use this external 1 switch to switch channels. In this case, I'm using it to switch channels on the Power Station 100. So I could go from a louder or you could do the opposite for a solo boost, or like I said, you could use it to switch channels on your amp. The external 2 switch will activate the effects loop on the Power Station 100. The PS2 Power Station has an effects loop also, but it's not switchable. The PS100's is switchable, and it can be done from that external 2 switch. And all of this is MIDI foot switchable. Right now I've got this very simple Tech21 MIDI controller going, and let me show you how easy it is to program something. I pick the switch I want to use. Let's go to that one. I want to use the Princeton, and I want to use it in that first cabinet with the loop on and the external switch activated, store, and now we'll jump back. And it's there. It's really easy to program. And if you're not a MIDI person, no problem. It comes with this foot switch. So from the foot switch, I could switch the channels, right? Or I have 2 settings, an on or off. So let's say for this one, I want to go to that Princeton setting. Doot, doot. And now I go to the alternate. I want the deliverance with all of those off. And it remembers your last setting. It's dead simple to program. So going a little deeper now, I've added another cabinet. So we have been using multiple heads with just 1 cabinet, but now I have a 112 cab as an option here. So this is the Princeton going in through the 412. And now I'm sending it to the 112, which is an 8 ohm open back cab. And now we're going a little deeper, stay with me. I added another cab in the form of another load box. So I know this is, you could just run straight out of the power station and you're good to go. However, if you have another load box, you could use that as a cabinet and then send that to your DAW. So you could go cabinet mic'd up, or just go direct. I mean, you have crazy options. So going to, amplifier 2 still on the Princeton cabinet. I have it set to, I think it was set to 8 ohms. Yeah. And now I'm using an IR in the box. And if you want to use multiple cabs, you just push both cabinet buttons in, and now you're running all of the cabs simultaneously. You'll have to adjust for the impedance, and it's going to change the sound because impedance are changing. Speaking of which, let me show you. Like, we'll run the deliverance, and we're going into the 412, and it's a 16 ohm cab, but I could change the impedance from the front panel, and you could hear what that sounds like. Maybe you want to hear it at 4 ohms, and it's not going to damage anything because you have this impedance matching transformer here. So that is the ZMACS 4x4 from Fryette. It is a studio solution. It is a live solution. If you are already in a power station scenario, this is a great buddy for that. If you've got your jam room set up or your studio set up and you want multiple amps and multiple cabs with fast switching, beautiful, clean Fryette signal path, this is definitely worth your look. The ZMACS 4x4 from Fryette. Oh yeah.